We love on this show to always give you a deep dive on whatever the thing is going on at any given time, especially as it relates to combat operations, whether it's in the Russia-Ukraine war, in the Middle East, potential wars that may be going on in the Indo-Pacific area. But we have a real treat for you today, in that one of my heroes that I've had from watching a lot of the military movies over the years, especially ones that were really realistic. That is Captain Dale Dye, for a former Vietnam vet, actually. He's been involved with lots of the most famous movies you'd probably ever want to see. And Captain Dye, first of all, just welcome to the show. Real treat to have you on today.
Well, thanks, Dan. It's a treat to be able to talk to a kindred spirit. So let's get to it.
Let's do that. First of all, because you've been involved in some of the biggest war, military movies ever, like Platoon and the Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers, etc., and probably a lot more beyond that. So, but some of the biggest ones there, and I'm just wondering if you could just first of all just tell us, how did you even get into this industry from being I think it was a Marine captain, right?
Yeah. Well, the truth is, it was primarily by accident. I kept seeing military movies, and I guess that's natural since I was a professional military man. And the common denominator, Dan, was they just pissed me off. They weren't reflections of who we were as professional soldiers or even unprofessional short-term soldiers. And they certainly weren't accurate in their depiction of combat. And I thought that was unfair. I thought somebody ought to do something about that. And when you're ignorant, you can do a lot of things people tell you can't do. And people were certainly telling me that I had no business going out to Hollywood and trying to convince them that I had a better way to build a movie or a mousetrap for that matter. But I was ignorant. And like a Marine, I said, well, that's nonsense. I can do this. I'll just go out there to Hollywood and square those people away. uh, well, it didn't quite work out that way. I was out there about a year trying everything I could think of to convince people that I had a better idea, that if we only depicted it the way it was, if we only depicted characters the way they really are, it would be much more dramatic than what they were dreaming up. Nobody was willing to listen to that. And then I caught a break. Without going into a long story, I was able to get a meeting with a man who was himself a Vietnam combat veteran. And I said, well, if I can just convince this guy, he might have some semblance of understanding. That was a man named Oliver Stone. And I did convince him by hook or crook, I guess. And he bought it. He said, okay, I think you're right in your conception. The question is, are you the right guy to pull it off? And I guess it was an experiment. He gave me 33 actors who you wouldn't have known in those days, but you certainly do now. Johnny Depp, Forrest Whitaker, Willem Dafoe. And he said, I want you to take them to the Philippines for 3 weeks. And that's what time you've got. And you make them live like we lived when we were young men in combat in Vietnam. And do whatever's necessary. No outside contact whatsoever. I won't bug you. But when you bring those people down out of those mountains, those jungle-covered mountains, they better be what we were when we were 19 in Southeast Asia. And fortunately, I was able to do that and brought them down. And then we won 4 Academy Awards for that little $5 million picture, which, nothing succeeds like success in Hollywood. And so people said, oh, hey, that idiot that was over here trying to sell us a new concept maybe has something to contribute.
Maybe he's got something here. So I'm just curious, how did you go from a year of, just probably blood in your head on trying to break through walls to even getting the meeting with Oliver Stone? How did that even happen?
I can't tell you because I don't think the statute of limitations has run out yet.
But it was fair enough.
But it was hook or crook. And I had like 3 minutes. He was cutting another picture. I think it was Salvador at that time. And I had 3 minutes. Get in there, tell him what you want to say, and he'll either buy it or I'll throw you out, and we'll call you later. It was done through connections and through machinations and through flat out lying. and eventually I got those 3 minutes and made them count.
Wow, that's extraordinary. That's 3 minutes to change an entire industry, not just in your life. That's amazing. And how something so small could have such big impact, really.
Yeah, I didn't know it at the time, Dan. I mean, I thought, well, this will either fly or it won't fly, and I'll probably end up, going back wherever I came from and becoming a barfly at the VFW. But it flew, and I think the guy just recognized that it was going to be impossible to present an emotional and visually credible depiction of the Vietnam experience without giving those young actors who had absolutely no military experience or any experience really of the kind of environment that we were
Yeah.
fighting in Southeast Asia. They had to have an understanding of that, and if I could give them that understanding and let them internalize it, let them understand from whence their character was coming, that it would work fine. That's what I believed, and apparently Stone believed it too. After I brought him down out of the mountains.
And so let's back up a little bit. So where did you gain that knowledge to impart it on these guys? Can you tell us a little bit about what your combat experience was in Vietnam?
Well, sure. I did several tours in Vietnam, especially during the hot spots, 1967, 68, 69, and 70. I was in the Tet Offensive in Hue, uh,
Wow.
Tet of 1968. Before that, and this may lead us to some of the things you want to talk about later, I experienced holding a position overlooking the Ben Hai River, which is the 18th parallel, the demilitarized zone in Vietnam, at a place called Can Thien. And we were up there with a couple of battalions of Marines and some soldiers who were supporting us. And it was literally, we were taking 200 and 300 rounds of incoming artillery a day, and we were living in bunkers. You couldn't get out of the bunkers. And you just get pounded and pounded and pounded. So I had that experience, and I knew that what that was about, psychologically, especially.
Wow.
Um, so I had a long time in combat, and then I even had a taste of combat in the Middle East, in Beirut in 1982, 83.
Oh,
So
wow.
I kind of brought some combat credibility, if you will, to the equation.
Wow, that's yeah, those were some of the bigger engagements there, and yeah, that's definitely going to lead into some of the things we want to talk about a little bit more. I understand you also have an audio book that's going to be coming out here, coming up on Peleliu, part of another series I know that you've done. I wonder if you could tell us just a little bit about that, because I've always found that battle in Peleliu from World War II in the Pacific really just really interesting because of its brutality, as well as the human element that was involved with that. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what made you write on that and what you discovered.
Well, a couple of things. Let me just start with the broader picture. I've written about, I think it's probably 18 or 19 books now. Most of them are novels. And in the process of writing, I became a huge fan of Lee Childs and the Jack Reacher series. And so I said, I need to create a character like that. And so I did. I created Shake Davis, a retired Marine warrant officer, and I put him in various situations, dangerous situations, that related to battles that the Marines had fought. So he ends up in Mexico at Chapultepec, and he ends up in Korea at the Chosin Reservoir, doing modern things, but always with that historical balance in mind. And Peleliu was one of those things. Peleliu was the second of the Shake Davis books that I did, and it comes out in September 15th, which is the 80th anniversary of
Mm.
the Battle of Peleliu.
Oh, wow.
And I was always interested in Peleliu for a couple of reasons, and you touched on a couple of them. It was, if anything was a meat grinder in the Pacific, it was Peleliu, and that's in comparison to things like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, Peleliu was special. And I had the opportunity, both while I was on active duty and later when I was retired and working on video games and movies and that sort of thing, to actually go and explore Peleliu. And it's a long trek. You got to get to Bobble Top in the Palaus and then take a boat and get up to Peleliu. But the fascinating thing was that everything was almost as it was.
Wow.
I mean, I ran across a complete LVTP-4 on the island of Negasiba, just sitting there with machine guns still attached. And so many of the caves in the Umberbergal Massif on Peleliu had been just undisturbed for years and years and years. And so I spent that time kind of crawling around in there and trying to put myself both in the Japanese position and in the American Marine position, and thinking it over and really understanding what that battle was like on the ground for the people who were gutting it out on nothing but, a couple of miles of coral, and that's it. And a Japanese force that absolutely was not going to surrender or give any quarter. And it was a really, really rugged fight. And so I kind of specialized in it. I kind of just explored it and researched it. And I thought, well, look, let me put my character, Shake Davis, on Peleliu. Now I've got to find out why he's on Peleliu 60 years after the war. But I invented a scenario that he's helping out the defense establishment to fight a biological warfare threat, which is being developed out on Peleliu. And that's as much as you get right now. Go buy the book.
All right. Be happy to do that. Now I want to kind of transition into some different things here, because we're going to kind of ease from historical to some of your professional stuff into the current wars that's being fought, especially in Ukraine here, because these things all tie together. Now you've had obviously some marquee accomplishments here, like being with Tom Hanks there on the Saving Private Ryan. This one, what I consider kind of an iconic picture here, where you're telling him that you of course have a lot of these things on the Band of Brothers, and I actually want to show
pointing out where lunch is being served, but
that's what look. Well, that's what I thought. So it's good to have that clarified.
Yeah.
But I want to show, because the other one, in fact, where I first really realized who you were was when I watched the Band of Brothers while I was still in active duty. That's obviously one of the biggest ones that many in the military still watch to this day. And in the preparation for these guys, you mentioned what you did for, I guess, for the platoon show. Obviously, that's something that you then mastered and continued to do. I want to show just a clip of some of the training as viewed from some of the actors that you trained, how that went. Watch this.
I'm going to teach you a new kind of attack. Dangerous operation. It depends on the skill of your machine gunners. Your machine gunners have got their shit together. You can do this.
They do, sir.
Captain died. He'd have the cadre running around somewhere with these little submachine guns shooting blanks, and they would these guys are good. I mean, they're good. That's what they do. So you can't catch them. You can't find them. You're lucky if you can see them. And they're, no matter where they are, they're always behind you, popping up out of nowhere. Your first instinct is actually to freeze. Your second instinct is to run.
Fire!
We'd finish up, and Captain died. He'd either come up and tear us a new one, or begrudgingly say, you did some good things, and yeah, you did all right, Easy.
I think it went fine. Notice that they cleared the tank. They came off into here. The consolidation was good. The machine gun got up when it needed to. Grenaded the piss out of it. It worked. That's the key to consolidation. Get in here against that counterattack, and lo and behold, it came off, didn't it?
Yes, sir.
But you were ready for it. Not bad.
Now, one of the reasons that I am so enamored with the whole Band of Brothers series is I had the privilege once to meet Wild Bill Garnier, while I was still on active duty. I was a major. I had just actually gotten back from Afghanistan, one of my tours there, and had a chance to get to meet him and ask him some of these things about what it was like where he lived. And of course, he said that the picture was extremely realistic. And so that's kind of what I want to get to is, how do you convey to an actor or just regular civilian person and convey what it's like to be in combat? What kind of things do you tell them? Because it's got to be more than just, giving them a speech, in which it shows there that you take them out there and do that. How do you convert them into that?
Well, look, you have to understand that the average civilian, whether he's an actor or anything else, has no concept of what combat really is. The movies and television will tell you what it is physically. Rounds are flying and explosions are going off, and there's confusion, and there's very loud noises all the time. People are going down to the right and to the left. What they don't do is tell you what's going on in the mind, the human mind at that point. And that's part of our training as soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, whatever. Part of it is to prepare us for that, that confusion, to give us sort of a mental barrier against it, to give us some mental strength, some psychological strength against that sort of thing. And I do the same sort of thing in my full immersion training. The first thing I do is eliminate any reference whatsoever for the period that we're training to making a movie. There's I don't even say the word, it's the mission. And I demand that everybody adopt that mentality just physically to begin with, because it's going to take me a while to get in their minds. And the way I do that is I spend every evening after chow, usually after chow, I have a thing called stand down. And stand down is the one period during any training day that you can ask anything you want, anything that has ever fascinated you, anything you wanted to know about combat, what it feels like, all those touchy-feely questions that people avoid, and certainly us veterans don't like to talk about. Well, I will. I'll talk about them. And I'll tell them the weirdest things. What does it feel like to be injected with morphine after you're hit? They want to know that. How can you possibly communicate in combat? Why is it important to keep your head up instead of down? All of those questions come up. And what I try to do is provide a reasonable, understandable answer. And I stay with that question until I'm convinced, by seeing that little light go off behind their eyes, until I'm convinced that they at least have an understanding of that. And what I'm confident in, and what I think I've proven, is that once they have that understanding, they'll convey it in their performance. They can't help it, because now they understand what's being asked of them. They have some understanding of the situation that they're in, and they can respond as a human being would respond in that situation. So that's kind of the artsy fartsy theory behind it, but it works.
Now, one of the things that one of the, I guess, highlights, if you will, of the Band of Brothers series was the Battle of the Bulge. And that was obviously taking a very real fight from December 1944 to January 1945, which was really had some of the most emotional scenes of the whole series, the things that were fought in there. And you used the term meat grinder a minute ago of some of the things that you have fought in there. In the current fight right now in Russia and between Russia and Ukraine was the Battle of Bakhmut. Now, there's been several other, grueling fights, but this one in particular has been called by some the bloodiest infantry brawl since World War II. And I wonder if you can kind of, in a certain sense, treat us kind of like we're your next people to train. And I wonder if you can help, just for the regular viewer, so it's a regular civilian who's maybe never been in combat, what happened in the Battle of the Bulge that you trained those guys for, and what is it really like for these guys who are fighting it right now in these similar battles?
Sure, Dan. Look, I think it's important for everybody to understand one thing. We have a tendency to focus and emphasize technology in this war, the war in Ukraine right now. the business of drones and high tech radar and long range precision guided munitions and so on and so forth. That's fine. That's understandable, and that is an element of the fight, but it is not the gut of the fight. The gut of the fight is the eternal conflict. It is down in the mud and the blood and the beer with the infantry, backed by the artillery. And that's what's happened. Ukraine has essentially devolved into World War One, and I think that's obvious, but often ignored. Look, take all the technology you want to, but in the event, Ukraine, the fight in Ukraine between the Ukrainians and the Russians, is always going to devolve into that static infantry fight. And the idea, as it was in World War One, is to somehow break that static stalemate, somehow get moving, somehow make a push through. And I think we're seeing the Ukrainians try that. The Ukrainians try that right now, this week, in fact. But it always inherently has the possibility, the very real possibility of breaking out into that bloody, muddy stalemate where the infantry has got to push, probe, fall back. Artillery picks it up, and artillery pounds the hell out of the bad guy, and the bad guy pounds the hell out of you with artillery. And that's the nature of this fight. It's the nature of future fights, no matter how high tech they get. And I think that's what we miss often. We miss that in the reportage that comes out of the Ukraine.
Now, let me ask you a specific question. The Battle of the Bulge, as depicted in the Band of Brothers, showed that they were surrounded. They didn't have any air cover because of the weather, et cetera. And so, they were in a very desperate situation. They're waiting for the Germans to come attacking with their armor, et cetera. And they really showed a lot about the fear and the trepidation of the Americans there in the 101st. But it's also that they knew that when the weather broke, that there was a lot of guys behind them to come up. So that kind of gave them the motivation to say nuts when they were asked to surrender, et cetera, by the Germans, and they didn't do it. I wonder if you can, to the best of your knowledge, like the difference between and the harder position, I think, for the guys who were fighting in Bakhmut, because they didn't have this certainty that when the weather clears, there's a bunch of people coming to our aid, because there weren't people coming to their aid, and they were methodically being pushed by the Russian side. And what goes into the mind of a soldier when he doesn't have a lot of fundamentals to say, yes, I know help's coming, but still keep fighting, even in the face of what it looks like are impossible odds?
Well, look, I think the first thing to understand is what the 101st veterans said when the press reported that they were relieved and they were saved. And this 101st said, we didn't need to be saved, thank you. We're doing fine just here. Of course, they weren't doing fine, and they were hard pressed. The weather was a bitch, snow and mud and that sort of thing, and it is in Ukraine right now. It's just now coming into their fighting season. The spring is coming, and the thaw will be there, and what the thaw brings is mud. And what the winter brought in the Bulge was snow and bitter, bitter cold. And we tried to make sure that audiences watching Band of Brothers understood that. The cold was an enemy. And in Ukraine, the mud is an enemy. And the business that you don't know, I think. My experience, my personal experience, leads me to think that there were damn sure times when I thought I wasn't at all sure that somebody was going to come to my aid or my rescue. And I don't think you think about that a lot. I don't think you sit there and think, well, if I could just survive for the next couple of days or the next week or the next month, that Patton and the weather will clear and the Air Force will come in and save the day. You don't think like that. You think moment to moment. How can I live for the next 50? How can I stay warm for the next 15 minutes so I continue to fight? So I think crediting the people in the Bulge with sitting there and hoping and praying that relief was coming is giving them too much. I just don't think they were concerned with it. They were concerned with staying alive in the next 15 minutes. The fact that they did get relieved was a pleasure, but they were so damn obstinate about it. They said they didn't need to be. We can hold out forever, and that's the spirit. That's the
Yeah.
spirit of the warrior. I think that permeated Bakhmut and permeated the Bulge and permeates Bakhmut.
Now, so let's go back to your personal experience again. So for the Ukraine side in the Battle of Bakhmut, so they were methodically pushed back over whatever, I think it was total 9 months before they finally had to withdraw. Then they did. Similar dynamic played out in Avdiivka. They ended up getting pushed out of that. They kept getting pushed back, but they still keep on fighting. When you were fighting in Vietnam, tell me what I guess your understanding was, what your instructions were, even in terms of, are you fighting to win a war or are you fighting to win a battle? And does that have any impact on once you withdraw and you see then ultimately that the United States withdrew and we gave back everything that you had been fighting for? How does that strike you?
Well, look, I think it's important to understand that it would have been really nice if someone would have bothered to explain to us what we were doing and why we were doing it. That was sadly lacking in many cases. So there were a bunch of different opinions and conceptions and misconceptions on what we were doing. And I think like it is usually with almost any man on the ground in a fight, you're concerned with what's out there at the end of your bayonet, rather than what's the big picture. Even with the advent, I think, of mass communications and the ease of mass communications that we experience today, I think on the battlefield, it's really difficult in the face of the challenges to stay alive, to stay warm, to stay dry. It's really difficult to contemplate that, and it often is better if you don't. If you just concentrate on what's happening today, now, and don't take a lot of time to examine the big picture, because it's not going to be helpful usually.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's not something a lot of people would have thought about there, right? And because I have 4 combat deployments of my own, but I mean, they frankly pale in comparison to what some of these things, whether it's the Battle of the Bulge or what these guys in Russia, Ukraine are facing. So I actually don't have as much of the understanding of the real stress and pressure over extended periods of time. So it's why it's valuable to hear from somebody like you, who has not just studied it, but actually lived it as well.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt you, but I think it's important to understand that the harder the press, the more the pressure is exerted, the less likely you are, if you want to survive, the less likely you are to consider big pictures. What happens is the focus narrows. The focus narrows to now, today, the next 15 minutes, the next week. And larger geopolitical issues and that sort of thing, those are for later if you survive.
I see. That makes total sense. And in fact, I want to look at that moment by moment thing. So you talked about some of your experiences specifically with artillery and living in bunkers at the outset of the show here. I want to show a short clip from what life is like for the Ukrainian soldier on the front line now, very much in line with what you talked about. Watch this.
Senior Lieutenant Oksandr Yavshenko is about to discover that amidst those bodies is the body of his friend who made the walk just a few moments before him. What happened, he asks. The young, stunned soldiers simply stare at where the shell hit and where the 22-year-old soldier's body lies. But this is only the start. The commander begins to shore the defences, and there's another hit.
Now, we've actually had a Ukrainian fighter on our show before, who was telling us that in a similar regard, it's not just the artillery, but especially the drones right now. He said that you can't even hardly get out of the slit trench even to use the bathroom, much less to do anything else, because something's going to come down out of the sky and hit you one way or the other. explain to us a little bit of the mentality of what it's like in the moment when you're experiencing that stuff. How do you just keep going for the next 10 to 15 minutes when you know that's what you're facing?
Well, look, it's called bunker fever, and those Ukrainian kids you were watching, they've got it, and you can tell it in their eyes. You have to find a way to distract yourself, and there are as many ways to do that as there are individuals. But dwelling on the fact that you can't get out to go take a leak without fear of being hit on by some drone or some mortar or artillery round coming in, that's a reality. And so I think it is the root, in many cases, of what all of us old soldiers know as that black combat humor. And we start making jokes out of things. Did you hear that last one come in? Damn, sounds like it's somebody skinning a cat. It's that sort of thing that will distract you enough to not let you dwell on your situation. And dwelling on your situation can cause a great case of crying the poor ass, which is something you do not want to do, especially in a situation like that. As any old soldier knows. So you find ways to distract yourself, and the fact that you're not alone, the fact that you have guys right there on your left and on your right that you know are suffering the same sort of thing as you are, is helpful. And it is the warrior spirit, the survival spirit, that I think dominates and is the reason we pay attention to things like that Band of Brothers.
I want to now look at kind of beyond that. So that's during the combat, because you can't even dwell on much. Forget about the big picture. Whatever happens beyond that is, I think, not even in the mentality at all. But that does eventually come back in. There's already, especially with some of the guys who were wounded and taken off the front line, and they lose that focus and the reason for not thinking about anything further. And then now they have time to start thinking about things. And PTSD and some of the mental stress is really starting to weigh itself in on some of these guys, especially deprived. And it sounds perverse, but deprived of that combat focus. A lot of these things now start coming and they have time to think. And I wonder what your personal experience was after your combat, and if even if it wasn't anything like some of these. What do you think it's going to be, and what are the concerns for guys who are coming off here? Because, and I'll just preface this by saying, one of my big concerns because I have a number of former colleagues who suffered a lot worse of PTSD than anything I ever did. And I just know that we have a large numbers of it, and it's nothing compared to what I fear once all the guns fall silent here, is that Ukraine will have a huge challenge to try and take care of these guys. What if you can kind of help us understand what that challenge might be?
Sure. Look, no one who has lived through near death, as practically any combat soldier who's been in serious engagements has, can ever escape the fact that they'll be eternally lifelong marked by it. Their sense of smell, their sense of touch, their sense of vision, things will appear brighter than they ever did before. That's a natural occurrence. What bothers me, and I would argue with your characterization, PTSD, what does a D mean? Disorder. Well, no, it's not. It's not a disorder, and we need to stop thinking of it that way. It is a natural human reaction to the stress that you were put under at some point. Is it traumatic? Sure it is. Is it a disorder? No, I don't think it is. I think it's perfectly human. And there are ways to fight it if we don't succumb. If we don't say, okay, I'm disabled. I'm ruined for the rest of my life because of what I went through. You're not, and you shouldn't be, and you won't be if you don't allow yourself to be. Now, there's ways to fight it. One of the things that I hear from young men and women that I talk to regularly, because they're seeking the same sort of thing you're looking for. One of the things I hear from them regularly is, I can't talk about it. nobody would understand, and I can't try to explain it because it's just too much. That's where you're making your mistake. Look, it doesn't make any difference whether they understand it or even sometimes if they want to hear it. What you've got to do is get that poison, that post-traumatic poison that's eating your guts, and you got to get it out somehow. You have to get it out. How do you do it? Well, in my case, well, first of all, the first thing you do is the perfectly human characteristic. You try to self-medicate it. So you start with booze or drugs or something like that, and if you survive that, you know it's not going to work, and it hasn't changed anything. It hasn't even numbed you to the point that you expected. So what you do is you crawl away from that, and you say, okay, what next? Well, what's next is get the poison out. I did it because I'm facile with words in the English language. I did it with writing, and you can too. Uh, what it does, if you talk about it, if you write about it, if you do interviews about it, what it does is give you a new understanding, um, an understanding that you're not capable really of realizing yourself. Look, it sounds a lot like fuzzy-headed navel gazing, but it's not. It's you trying to help yourself, and you can help yourself if you get rid of some of that poison. Now, do you need to look for an effect of getting rid of that poison? Do you need to write a best-selling book or create a hit movie or be a constant interview guest? No, it's not about that. It's about you talking about it, writing about it, visualizing it so that you can understand it. Once you understand it, you can deal with it.
Wow. Well, that's great advice. We're going to do all we can to actually share that with, especially with some of my colleagues that I know who do still struggle with some of these things. So I appreciate that just on a personal level. But when just more broadly, we just really appreciate you coming on today and sharing some of these views. It's really great to me to get to actually talk with you and ask questions as opposed to just watching some of your work on television and the movies. I'm just curious. I know you've got a bunch of books you've written. You mentioned that a minute ago. In fact, real quick, I wonder if you can just tell people where can they find these if they want to go find some of your work.
Sure, you can just get on the old internet and look for Dale Dye books, daledye.com, and it'll take you to them. I'm writing a regular column called Checkpoint Delta now, which is you can find that at let me look this up here a minute. CP Delta, checkpointdelta.com. And that's part of my medication. That's part of my getting things off of my mind and out of my gut. So look for daledye.com books, and you can find all of these and hopefully read them. And for those of you who are wondering, can I write something and people will read it? It doesn't make any difference. What's important is that you've gotten it out.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to check that out myself. Do you have any other future movies that you've got in the works that you're working on?
Yeah, I do. Once we did Band of Brothers, the 101st Airborne, I became the 101st Airborne's favorite Marine, and and the 82nd got on me, and they've been after me for years to try to do their version of Band of Brothers. And so I'm trying to do that. I'm writing a limited miniseries, a 6-part miniseries to cover the Battle of Lafayette on D-Day that the 82nd fought, and I want to see if I can become the 82nd's favorite Marine and get that done. But I'm in the process of selling it. But I'm constantly writing, and I even get calls occasionally to act and do things. So I stay busy, and I'm turning 80 this year. So
wow.
I'm still out there pushing PT and lifting weights. So I won't fall over. Who knows?
Well, that's the way to do it. Well, listen, Captain Dye, we really appreciate you coming on today. Really do appreciate it. And all of our folks I know really do as well. So thank you.
Dan, it was fun. I'll do it again next time you want to.
Would love to have you back. Thank you very much. And we appreciate you guys coming on. Be sure to watch us at 3:00 today. We have Professor, MIT Professor Ted Postal. You know, we've had him on before, one of our favorites, explaining to us exactly what's going on with Israel's Iron Dome and what is going to be the possibility if it gets tested from both Iran and Hezbollah. Don't want to miss that. Tune us in at 3:00 this afternoon. We'll see you on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.